Hey yo, Santa comes from Odin? Yeah, what's going on, party people in the place to be? I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Hope everybody's having a good Christmas Eve. And we got, my man Remy on the check-in. Definitely appreciate it, sir. And of course, if you have not yet already, please like, share, and subscribe. We're only a few subs away from cracking the 5,000 mark. It'd be really great if we could do it right before New Year's. Um, can't do it without you guys. You guys are the street team. Please spread the word. Make sure that you yourselves have been subscribed because you might think you are, but you might not. Please, check to make sure you're already subscribed and click on the notification bell so that you will be aware when BK pops up. And if you appreciate what BK's been doing all year long, you can spread a little Christmas cheer by throwing a little coinage at the PayPal link that's pinned on top of the chat. Or if you want to be a monthly supporter of BK, you can join the Patreon where you get an assortment of gifts to enhance your personal Bible study. All right. So, oh man, we got the incomparable, the indelible king of all mods, Nate 2D2 on the check-in. You know what I mean? Greatly appreciate that. You know what I mean? So what we doing today? What we doing today? Well, the subject is Santa Claus a plagiarized version of the pagan god Odin? Now, a couple of caveats before we get into this. Do I believe that what we now call Santa Claus is a real person? No. Does he come from a actual historical figure? Yes, he does. But he doesn't ride on flying reindeer and swoop into people's chimneys to give gifts. Okay, that's not what's happening. Brother Brian, and it's good to see you, sir. What up? What up? What up? All right. I don't believe that. I also don't believe parents should lie to their children and tell them that Santa Claus gave them the gifts. You gave them the gifts. You worked hard. You did the overtime. You deserve the credit. Don't give it to this mythical guy named Santa Claus. Even though Santa Claus does come from an actual historical figure within church history, St. Nicholas, right? Yes, Nate, I hate to break it to you of all days, but yes, Santa is not real, son. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So yeah. So I just want to make that clear. Santa Claus is not real. You shouldn't believe in him. It's a myth, it's a legend, but he does come from an actual historical figure. All right. So what's the big deal? Is Santa Claus a theological underpinning of Christianity? No, not at all. Who cares about Santa Claus? In that sense, who cares? Right? So then if you don't care, BK, why are you talking about this? Well, a lot of people try to use these arguments to sway people from being Christians. And then you have other people who are actual believers who will use these pseudo arguments to prop themselves up as if they are more holier than thou because they don't, partake in Christmas celebrations. So both sides are wrong, So I just want to break down the history so that these things can't be used to dissuade believers. Okay, not that if you're a believer you have to know who Santa Claus is, but again, they use this as a way to kind of wedge themselves into your belief system so that you can start doubting Christianity. Even though Santa Claus has, who cares, right? But it's important to know because this is something that they use. So I want you guys to be equipped and aware. So, with that being said, this is from Luca to Lycia, the land of Serpentine and Saint Nicholas. Very hard to get book. It took me a minute to get it, but I got it. And this is what it says. Saint Nicholas, commonly referred to as Santa Claus, Santa, Kris Kringle, Père Noel, or Father Christmas in modern and popular religious culture, was a Christian man of faith from Anatolia associated with various legends and miracles, who was actually the bishop of the ancient Lycian city of Myra, Demir, in the 4th century. That date is going to be really important. Keep that in the back of your head. 4th century. The image of St. Nicholas began to take shape in a remarkably eclectic cultural environment of late antiquity and was constantly refined and elaborated through the ages, thus reaching its now familiar form towards the end of the 19th century, mainly from the contribution of American media. Beyond the modern figure he evolved into popular culture, St. Nicholas has been venerated as a saint through the Christian world since the 11th century, with the exception of Protestant communities. While the customs and practices associated with his life have now been celebrated in combination with Christmas celebrations, right, Christmas celebrations. A great part of the corpus containing information about Nicholas' life and deeds derives from later period sources that include several accounts interlaced with local folklore or legends. Judging from these sources, we may easily gather that St. Nicholas was a clergyman renowned for his charity and austerity of life rather than being a major theologian, which is confirmed by the fact that the narratives surrounding his life are fueled by the folkloric tradition of ordinary people. Besides, we also know that there exists no theological texts or treatises authored by St. Nicholas. The earliest sources that indirectly reference St. Nicholas, setting aside those provide very little information, such as Procopirius del Edificius, I think that's Greek or Latin for the buildings, something like that, or the liturgy, my goodness, of the theologian John Chrysostom, 407, and now lost books written by the 6th century Saint Nicholas of Sion, starring a monastery north of Demir in Lycia, who shares the same name and sometimes has his stories confused with those of Saint Nicholas of Myra. Although they are mythological, the most important latter sources that provide more information include the letter from the patriarch Methodios of Constantinople, 9th century, to Theodore, Archimandre Michael, 9th century, and Vita Pa Michelum, Patriarch Methodos of Constantinople's Legato Santi Nicolai, and the work of Byzantine Simeon Logotata Metaphysites, 10th century. In light of these similar sources, it is believed that St. Nicholas was born around 270 in Patria Lycia, which was then part of the Roman Empire, and died in Myra, where he served as a bishop from 343 to 345. Theophanes and Nona, according to some sources, although it is said that Nicholas, born to a Christian father named Epiphanius and a mother named Joanna, performed miracles from the moment of his birth. It is understood that these accounts were written by the source authors under the influence of local traditions. Right? So we have an actual historical person who actually held an office within the church, but as time and the centuries, marched on, more and more local folklore traditions were added to this person to a point where we get the myth and legend that we are aware of today. After his birth, his mother immediately recovered, and as soon as he was born, he stood for 3 hours without any support at the church's baptismal font to show respect for the Holy Trinity. He fasted continuously from childhood and nursed from his mother's breast only once on Wednesdays and Fridays. His life story, woven with many miraculous phenomena, has become more legendary over time. Christian literature has therefore named St. Nicholas Nicholas the Wonder Worker, meaning Nicholas who performs miracles. Within this legendary rhetoric, a more historically accepted known fact is that Nicholas' entry into the church as a priest was aided and contributed by his uncle, who was also named Nicholas and served as the bishop of Patara. He is appointed as a parish presbyter to the monastery where he served, and his hair is tonsured, a haircut specific to clergy. It is not difficult to understand that he led a hermetic life in the early stages of his life. So let's go down here. Saint Nicholas is chosen as the bishop during the persecutions that Diocletian began against Christians. Bishop Nicholas is arrested and imprisoned around the year 300. Right? So let's see here. What else should we do here? According to some, this is the part that's always interesting. According to some late Christian sources, such as Petrus the Natubus, Bishop of Aquilo near Venice in the 14th century, St. Nicholas attended this council, in fact, considering that he allegedly slapped the Alexandria presbyter Arius, who denied the belief in the Trinity and divinity of Jesus. That's my favorite part of the legend, right? That he smacked earth, wind, and fire out of Arius, right? Allegedly, right? So this is just a flavor of how the historical Saint Nick becomes this wonder worker and this, I guess a goon as well, smacking people during councils and all that, right? So it grew into this massive legend, right? But what does this have to do, right, with Odin, right? What does any of this have to do with Odin? Well, there's an article called "No, Santa Claus is not inspired by Odin." And before we continue, let me see who's here. We got Lauren on the check-in. All right. Thank you for coming. And again, guys, please like, share, and subscribe. Share this link. Please share this link. And this is written by Spencer McDaniel. He holds a BA in History and Classical Studies, Ancient Greek and Latin Languages and Literature, with departmental honors in history from Indiana University of Bloomington. And he has an MA in Ancient Greek and Roman Studies from Brandeis University. All right? So this is what he says. Arguably, the primary basis for the whole supposed connection between Odin and Santa Claus is the fact that Odin is associated with the Norse holiday of Yule, commonly known as Yule in English, and Santa Claus is associated with the contemporary Christian holiday of Christmas, which is popularly believed to have been heavily influenced by Yule. There are, however, many serious problems with this supposed connection. The first problem is that, as the New Zealand classicist Peter Gainsford discusses in this blog post he wrote in December 2018, Jule's supposed influence on Christmas has been greatly exaggerated. So let's see what Mr. Gainsford here says. Our earliest evidence on Yule and our evidence on Christmas come from different times and different places. Christmas originated as a Mediterranean festival first attested in the 4th century, but with a backdrop reaching back to the 2nd century. Yule pops up from the 6th century onwards in East Germanic and North Germanic sources as a season of the year. There's only the faintest trace of Yule in modern Christmas customs. So we have Santa, who's connected to Christmas, and you have Odin, who's connected to Yule, and people make a connection that somehow Christmas has something to do with Yule. And here's the issue. The issue is Christmas was way celebrated before there was even a St. Nicholas, right? Traditionally, fourth century goes back to the 2nd century. The reason why we could go back to the 2nd century because we have commentaries written by Hippolytus, and in his commentary in the book of Daniel, he mentions that the birth of Christ was December 25th. His commentary was dated to the 2nd century. But we know that the North African churches were celebrating the birth of Christ prior to 311, which is early 4th century. So we know that the churches celebrated early 4th century, but already believed that Christ was born on the 25th of December as early as 2nd century in the Mediterranean. Whereas Yule is 6th century in Germany. We could probably stop the video right here. You know what I mean? It's like there's centuries and hundreds of thousands of miles apart from one another. So to say that Yule has any connection with Christmas is just not logical. It makes no sense. So we could stop right here, but we're gonna keep going. We're gonna continue. Back to the article by Spencer. Christmas, as is celebrated today, is an Anglophone world, has very little in common with what is known about how Jule was celebrated in pre-Christian Germanic cultures. Even the similarities between the two holidays that do exist can be much more parsimoniously explained as the result of similar traditions developing independently in different contexts. Unfortunately, when people start out with the incorrect assumption that Christmas is simply Jewel rebranded, they tend to jump to the automatic conclusion that Santa Claus must be Odin rebranded. The second problem with attempts to link Santa Claus with Odin through Santa's association with Christmas and Odin's association with Jewel is that, as Jackson Crawford points out in his YouTube video explaining why Odin isn't Santa, their respective associations with these holidays may in fact be very different. Odin is primarily associated with Jule through his epithet Julnir, which means the Euler or the one who Yules. This epithet is attested in the very old skaldic poem composed in the late 10th century CE. Remember, Saint Nicholas, the actual historical figure, 4th century. Earliest thing we know about Odin, 10th century. Okay? As Crawford notes in his video, though, there are over 80 different names for Odin attested in the surviving Old Norse sources, and Julnir is merely one of those many names. Additionally, although the epithet Julnir certainly indicates that Odin was associated with the holiday of Jule in some way, it does not explain the nature of his association. It certainly does not even remotely suggest in any way that any Norse person during the Middle Ages ever thought that Odin might have brought people presents at Jule. So here we have, right? So we know how St. Nicholas is attached to Christmas. We don't know how Odin is attached to Yule. He is, but we don't know how. Because actually, when you talk to and read the folklorists, they will tell you that they don't have a whole lot of data when it comes to North, what we now will call Norse paganism. There isn't really a whole lot of data to begin with, right? So, you know, it's just that the connection here is just it's not even, it's less than faint. It's less than faint. But let's continue. Crawford notes that many Old Norse sources, including the saga of Hakon the Good, written by Icelandic antiquarian Snorri Sturluson, lived 1179 1241. Notice the dates. Notice the dates. Remember, St. Nicholas, 4th century, right? Suggested that Jule was a time when people drank toasts to various deities. He speculates that Odin may have simply been the main deity to whom people drank toast at Jule, and that this may be the reason for his association with the holiday. This is speculative, right? Snorri Sturluson is speculating that maybe it's because of this. But no one's really sure what connection he even has to the holiday. So to say that Odin is connected to Jule, which is a rebranding of Christmas, well, the dates don't match, the times don't match, the places in which these events don't match, and Odin might not necessarily be really attached to that holiday to begin with. You know? Quick shout out. I'm happy to be here. I thought Christmas was pagan too once upon a time. So I'm learning, and I appreciate you, BK, for this very informative lesson. And I appreciate you for stopping by on Christmas Eve. You know, so yeah, I mean, I was there too. I was there too, and I kept studying, and once I found this, scholastic academic data, I had to humble myself and pivot from what I believed. And I see you've done that as well, and good for you. I appreciate that you have the humility to be able to do that. And as believers, that's always going to happen. There's going to be moments where we're going to be challenged in our beliefs, and we have to figure out if we need to pivot or not. And that's going to be the entirety of your walk in Christ. Because we're all learners, we're all students. We never fully come to a total understanding of this amazing gospel that we subscribe to. There's always so much more to learn. So I'm glad that you're on your journey. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So leaving the attempts to link Santa Claus with Odin through their respective associations with Christmas and Joe aside, the most obvious similarity between the two figures is that they both are said to have long beards, right? They both got beards, right? In the old Norse sources, one of Odin's epithets is Langbor, which means long beard. This epithet occurs in, among other places, the anonymous Skaldic poem. In the modern age, Santa Claus is universally iconic for his long, snow white beard, right? So, all right, so there's a connection there, right? They both have beards. Well, there are, however, two major problems with this supposed parallel. The first is that long beards are extremely common throughout world history, literature, and mythology. If I were to try to list every historical, literary, or mythological figure with a long beard, I would be listing them until Ragnarok. Indeed, it is worth mentioning that here that Nicholas of Myra is commonly shown with a long white beard. Why is that important that he mentions the color of the beard, right? Well, hang in there. And Byzantine Roman visual depictions dating so long before his cult was even popularized in Western Europe, Santa's snow white beard is far more likely to come from Nicholas of Myra than from Odin. The second problem is that, aside from the fact that they both have long beards, Odin and Santa have absolutely nothing in common in terms of their respective iconographies. Odin is described in Old Norse sources as a grim old man with one eye and a long gray beard. We know that Odin's beard is gray because in some places, including Grimmismal and Odin's Norfinn 3, he is, I don't know if that's a footnote or if that's an actual, like the third. Um, he is given the epithet Haboor, which means gray beard. All right, sorry. So if someone was to argue, well, hey, they both got beards, they both got long beards, so there's a connection there. Well, yeah, because most people in world history had long white, older men would have long beards. Problem here, Santa, St. Nicholas, is always looked at with, well, majority of the time, white beard, whereas Odin has gray beard. In fact, he is called that. That's one of his names, Graybeard. And he has one eye. And if anybody have seen even the Marvel movies, when Thor talks to Odin, right? He has the eye patch, you know. Santa doesn't have an eye patch. He has two eyes, you know. But it gets even more interesting, right? Because Odin often carries his spear, which is named Gungnir, and is often accompanied by two ravens named Hugin and Munin. When he travels among mortals, he is usually described as wearing a broad brim hat and a cloak, which is usually described as either blue or gray. So think Santa Claus and how he's usually depicted. And then think of Odin, right? He's wearing blue and gray, brim hat and a cloak. He has two ravens on his shoulders, one eye, gray beard. That's a lot. That's a lot of difference there between the two. They're not looking too familiar here. Until the 19th century, St. Nicholas, who, if you recall, the Dutch precursor to the American figure of Santa Claus, who is most recognizable in the English-speaking world today, was always portrayed as an old man with a long white beard, wearing a bishop's robe and a mitre, often holding a crosier as well. All of these attributes are clearly derived from the traditional iconography of St. Nicholas of Myra. Meanwhile, until the 19th century, Father Christmas, the English precursor to Santa Claus, was usually portrayed as a man with a long white beard, wearing a white fur coat of unclear or unspecified color. Visual representations of him before the 19th century were usually woodcuts in black and white. The oldest surviving visual depictions of the modern folkloric figure of Santa Claus occurs in the illustrations that originally accompanied the anonymous illustrated poem Old Santa Claus with Much Delight, which was first published in New York City. Man, New York, man, we just in everything, right? In 1821, in a paperback book titled The Children's Friend, A New Year's Present to the Little Ones from 5 to 12. The illustration that originally accompanied verse 1 of the poem portrays Santa Claus as a man with a long brown beard. He is shown sitting in a sleigh pulled by a single reindeer, wearing a red coat and a large brown fur hat, holding a whip in his right hand to drive the reindeer. And here is, wait, hold on. Where is it? Hold on. What's going on here? Why is it not showing? That's interesting. That's not, that's interesting. Hold on for a minute, guys. Why is it not showing? That is interesting. Okay, there it goes. I think I had a, let me fix this here for a minute. I want you guys to see this. All right. And here we go. And it still won't show it. Oh, it's too, that is so weird. Well, here's the other picture from the same poem. You see here, he has a long brown beard, large brown fur hat, and instead of wearing a red coat, he's wearing a green coat. Okay, this was published in 1821 in New York. This is one of the first illustrations of who we now call Santa Claus. Okay, there is very little in early descriptions and visual representations of Santa Claus in the 19th century to link with Odin. Aside from the fact both figures are said to be old men with long beards, indeed, if anything, Santa, as we know him today, has more visually in common with Nicholas of Myra, as he is portrayed in medieval Byzantine Roman representations, than with Odin. Since Santa's beard is usually described and portrayed as white, much like Nicholas of Myra's beard in Byzantine Roman depictions, rather than gray like Odin's beard. All right. So, summary, right? Christmas, 4th century Mediterranean, goes back to 2nd century Mediterranean. Jewel, 6th century Germanic, right? Saint Nick, actual historical figure. Odin, Germanic myth. We know that Santa is connected to Christmas. We kind of think that Odin's connected to Yule. But we don't know how. Right? They don't really look the same. As outside of the fact that they both are old men with beards. You know, Santa has never been depicted with an eye patch, with 2 ravens on his shoulders, and with a spear. Right? That they don't look the same. They're not from the same time frame. They're not from the same geographic area. It's not the same holiday. In fact, Yule is actually a time of year, whereas Christmas is a actual festival during a time of year. So again, there's you really forcing a connection here because there isn't any. That just isn't any. So another claim that I've encountered, Spencer says, is that supposedly Odin and Santa both wear red coats. The first problem with this claim is that, as Jackson Crawford points out in his video about Odin isn't Santa Claus, Odin, in fact, never described as wearing red in any Norse sources. On the contrary, he is actually most commonly described as wearing a gray or blue cloak. This claim, therefore, is a complete non-starter from the very beginning. So, from a visual standpoint, right, Santa has been seen wearing green and red. Odin, blue and gray. Santa, long white beard. Odin, long gray beard. Santa, both eyes work, from what we could tell. Odin, one eye. Santa doesn't carry weapons. Odin has a spear. It's like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't really see too much of a connection here. Yeah. Okay, what's going on here? What's going on here? Hold on, guys. Hold on. Let's see what's going on here. Okay. All right, so all right. I've seen many people try to claim that Odin riding on the back of a flying eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, is the inspiration for Santa riding in a sleigh pulled by flying reindeer. I originally rejected this claim as complete nonsense in my article about the history of Santa Claus that I wrote 2 years ago, since Sleipnir is an eight-legged horse, not a reindeer. And Odin is said to ride on Sleipnir's back, not in a sleigh pulled by him. I now, however, am aware that the idea of Santa Claus riding in a sleigh pulled by reindeer is an early 19th century American invention. Let me say it again. The idea of Santa Claus riding in a sleigh pulled by reindeer is an early 19th century American invention. The older Dutch tradition regarding St. Nicholas is actually that he rides around on horseback. So this is not even Dutch. The Dutch had him riding on a horse. It's the Americans that had him riding on reindeer. Okay. This tradition is firmly attested in, I can't even say that, that's not even English, a Dutch dictionary of folk sayings written by Carolus Tuneman and published in the year 1726. There are, however, still many serious problems with the hypothesis linking St. Nicholas' horse and Dutch folklore with Sleipnir. The first problem is that the putative connection is mainly based on the assumption that both horses can fly. But the idea that Sleipnir could fly is actually rather poorly attested in the medieval sources. As far as I'm aware, there's only one very brief reference of him flying in any surviving source written in Old Norse, which occurs in Snorri Sturluson's book. So again, it's hard to really extrapolate any meaningful data from Norse paganism because we have such few fragmented sources. So it's hard to really make any kind of argument like this. I've often seen people claim that Odin was said, oh, I like this part. You're going to like this. I've often seen people claim that Odin was said to give gifts to humans, much like Santa Claus. This claim is only half true at best, and in fact, the sense in which it is true is actually a startling illustration of just how different Odin and Santa really are. As Hilda R. Davis points out in her paper, Scandinavian Folklore in Britain, published in 1970 in the Journal of Folklore Institute, Volume 7, issue number 2-3, pages 177 to 186, Odin is a warrior god. Now watch this. The only gifts he is said to give humans in the Old Norse sources are weapons and equipment for battle. And he only gives these gifts to adult male warriors. He is never described in any medieval Norse source as giving benevolent gifts to children out of kindness and generosity. So yeah, he gives gifts, weapons to male warriors. But why? He actually has an agenda. There's a reason why he gives these type of gifts. As Jackson Crawford further elaborates in his YouTube video about Odin and his personality, one of Odin's primary goals throughout Norse mythology is to cause as many brave men to die violent deaths as possible so that he will able to harvest them and send them to Valhalla or Valhalla, which means the hall of the slain, where they will train perpetually to fight in Odin's army on the day of Ragnarok. Thus, when Odin gives someone a weapon as a gift, it is usually for the purposes of getting as many men to die violent deaths as possible. Big difference than, Santa Claus with his big red sack of gifts of dolls and puzzles and an assortment of toys. That's a big difference. Now, are they both giving things to people? Well, yeah, if that's the connection you want to make. But what are they giving and why are they giving are very, very different. So here's another one. Actually, before I do that, let me see what's up with the chat. Let's see here. What's going on, Phil Fox? The Real American. We got Michelle, Bodega Ladies on the check-in. All right. So one real similarity, so-called similarity, between Odin and Santa Claus is that they are both associated with the far north. Oh, okay. We got something here. There is some kind of connection here, right? Their connections to the north, however, are very different, and as far as the currently available evidence suggests, distinct in origin. Odin is associated with the far north because the original homeland of the Norse people who worship him was Scandinavia. By contrast, Santa Claus is associated with the far north because he is said to live at the North Pole. The idea that Santa lives at the North Pole, however, is the wholesale invention of Thomas Nast, who produced an influential illustration of Santa living in the North Pole that was published in December 29th, 1866 edition of Harper's Weekly. So this ain't some ancient source. There's this guy who decided to use this as a place of origin for Saint Nick. But why, right? Thomas Nast most likely chose to portray Santa living at the North Pole because at the time, there had been several well-publicized attempts to reach the North Pole, but none of these attempts had succeeded. The North Pole was therefore widely seen as mysterious, unreachable place, a place ideally suited for a mysterious folkloric being like Santa Claus to reside. It is highly unlikely that Nats had anything even remotely related to Odin or Norse mythology in mind when he made up Santa living at the North Pole. And there you have it, people. There you have it. I mean, it's crazy, right? So just recap, right? Christmas celebrated 2nd century Mediterranean festival. Yule, 6th century German, right? St. Nicholas, both of them have white beards, but every old man in antiquity had long white beards. Santa's beard was white. Odin's beard was gray. Santa had both use of his eyes. Odin had one. Santa wore red most of the time, even though his first illustration he wore green. Odin is known to wear blue and gray. Odin has 2 birds on his shoulders, 2 ravens. Santa does not. Santa is not known for carrying any weaponry. Odin has a spear. They both gave gifts. Santa gave gifts like toys and dolls and games. Odin gave weapons to male warriors, hoping that they will die in battle so that he can have them to train for his eternal battle of Ragnarok. Odin had an 8-legged animal that he rode. Santa had 8 reindeer. And those 8 reindeer don't derive from any ancient source, but from 19th century America. I mean, I mean, you know, I mean, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Where Odin gave the gift of hands. These are facts. These are facts. So where there is that, what connection? What connection do we have here? Oh, and by the way, you know, Odin is an actual myth, whereas Santa Claus comes from an actual historical figure named Saint Nicholas, who was a bishop in the 4th century. So, I mean, if Odin's spirit became the North Pole, I have not read that source, Nate. If you want to, cite that source, that'd be great. So again, right? So there's no connection, really. What connection? Right? Because the holidays don't have connection that they're a part of. Again, Christmas is a festival. Christmas was a festival during a time of year. Yule was an actual time of year, which later on became some sort of festival. And we don't even know how Odin is connected to that festival. But that festival comes, 400 years later in a different part of the world, literally. So, I mean, that's it, guys. So if someone on your timeline tries to bring up this idea that somehow Santa Claus is a plagiarized form of Odin, feel free to share this video. Right? Feel free to share this video. Okay? So yeah, so with that, guys, I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And with that, we are out. Peace.